So as I say, I'm going to introduce the First Minister now. If you've got questions for him, please pop them in the app. But before I do that, just one brief anecdote is that I was really delighted a few weeks ago to have an invitation to spend some time with the Minister, First Minister, have a meeting with him in Butte House. I was getting all my material prepared, all the data and evidence that we're working on across government to give him an update. And then just a couple of days before the meeting, it was cancelled. I thought, you know, it's really actually a very busy job the First Minister has. But then I discovered actually the reason the First Minister couldn't meet with me is because he'd been invited to the White House and into the Oval Office to meet President Trump. And, you know, I thought, Linda, on this one occasion, I'm not going to take it personally. So we have a chance to hear from him now. I'm really delighted to introduce John Swinney, MSP, the First Minister for Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and I'm so sorry about the cancellation of the meeting. I'll leave it to you all to decide what was the easier gig. Talking to Professor Linda Bald and the challenge that would come from her, or talking to the President of the United States and the challenge that would come from him as well. And you can perhaps talk about that in the discussion groups in the course of today. I'm really grateful to you all for coming today to what I consider to be an absolutely pivotal conversation in our journey to make sure that we deliver effective whole family support. As we say in the conference material today, whole family support, getting it right for everyone. Because this moment for me is central, absolutely central to my government's agenda. When I became First Minister about 16 months ago, a journalist asked me on the day I became First Minister, what will be your biggest priority as First Minister? And I said my biggest priority would be eradicating child poverty. And that reflects essentially the importance that I attach to what we're talking about today, what we talked about in the session where I brought leadership figures together earlier on in the summer in June, and what's underpinned a whole series of actions that the government has taken to increase the priority around the challenge of eradicating child poverty. And so I want to map that out to you at the very outset to reflect the significance I attach to the conversations that we're having here today. Because as Linda set out in the presentation, there's a whole amount of information that demonstrates quite clearly that we are making progress in the journey to eradicate child poverty. We are seeing child poverty levels in Scotland today that are lower than they were 30 years ago. We are seeing child poverty levels falling in Scotland when they're rising in the rest of the United Kingdom. But they are not falling enough. There is more that we have to do to advance that agenda. And I want to take a moment to explain why the eradication of child poverty is so central to my agenda and so central, in my view, to the future of our country. The government has 4 policy priorities: the eradication of child poverty, boosting economic growth in Scotland, making the transition to net zero, and improving our public services, particularly the National Health Service. And the danger of having 4 priorities and me articulating them like that is that there is a sense that those represent 4 individual discrete compartments, that there is not a connection between them. But I want to be absolutely crystal clear at the outset that I view there being a very direct relationship and connection between these 4 particular themes. If we don't successfully address the challenges of climate change, we will be wrestling with enormous difficulties in the years to come within our society. Indeed, a number of public authorities are already wrestling with those challenges today. So they affect the future of our society if we don't address the implications of climate change. If we don't stimulate our economy to the extent that we need to generate the wealth in our society, we will not have the ability to invest as I would want to see us invest in our public services, and particularly to enhance the health and social care services that are so important and so many of our population depend on, and particularly will depend on in the years to come, as the population is made up of a larger proportion of older people than even today. And we won't be able to realise the full potential of our country in generating that wealth if we don't have people who are participating in our economy fully and effectively to make their contribution to the generation of wealth in our society, which is why we need to make sure that children that are born into our society are able to grow up to live fulfilled lives that can contribute to our society in all of its respects, but particularly to make that economic contribution to our society. So when you hear me talking about the centrality of the eradication of child poverty, believe me, it's right at the heart of the government's programme, because the government's programme, in all of its respects, whether it's about growing the economy or making the transition to net zero or improving our public services, is all underpinned by whether we have an active and engaged and participative population that is able to make that contribution. And as you will all know, because of the work that you do, there are too many people in our society today who have been damaged by the experiences that they have had in their earlier years. And the focus that Linda demonstrated in that presentation is an absolutely relentless focus within government around the agendas, which are all interlinked, of getting it right for every child, a 20-year agenda that has helped us to improve the delivery of children's services in Scotland over that period. The work that we're committed to at this midpoint in the promise, 5 years in, 5 years to go in the promise, to significantly transform the experience of children who may be exposed to care, and fundamentally the agenda of eradicating child poverty. So all of those agendas come together in a way that needs us to act together and decisively to support families that face difficulties, and crucially to support families who face difficulty at the earliest possible opportunity that becomes visible or apparent. And just in the conversations that I've had today in the coffee room, I've been able to speak to a whole range of different practitioners who are here today, who are actively involved in that early intervention activity to ensure that we're moving as quickly as we can to support those who may well be in need and who may need our support. Because that whole approach, the development of effective whole family support, is critical to how we succeed in our journey of eradicating child poverty and ensuring that children in our society have the best opportunities and the best prospects they possibly can have. And that essentially brings me to characterise this agenda in the way that I think of it, and that I want you to think about this. This is essentially a national mission for Scotland. This is our central mission as a country, to ensure that together we are able to succeed in this journey of eradicating child poverty. Now, I think there's a huge amount of tremendously good work that's going on in Scotland today. I'll give you a couple of examples of things I've seen very recently, which passed the test for me of whole family support. I was out in Greater Easterhouse a few weeks ago, visiting a medical practice, Oakwood Medical Practice, where, as a consequence of some pilot funding, I know it's pilot funding, I'll come on to talk about these things in a moment, pilot funding for family link workers who are working with the GP practice in supporting families. And what I found out in those discussions and looking at that project is the family link workers are out there working with families who are essentially quite regular attenders at GP practices. But because the family link workers are working so closely, so intently with families, tackling issues such as housing or childcare or language barriers or financial issues or access to transport services, because they're doing all of that, they are supporting families to build resilience and build capacity, and as a consequence, the GPs were telling me that those families were making fewer and fewer calls on the time of GPs because they had support to get on with the issues that were causing them difficulty. So there's just one very simple example of how whole family support, of assisting families to overcome their difficulties, can then have a beneficial effect in other public services, freeing up those GPs to concentrate on deploying their skills where they are required in their busy lives. Another example was in Maryhill, where I went to visit a project taken forward by the wonderful charity Home Start. And Home Start essentially was what I would describe as the friendly anchor point. They were there as an accessible service within the Maryhill community. They were there to gather together families who were in need. And public sector agencies, Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, City of Glasgow Council, had located some of their teams in and around about this centre to help to provide services in a coordinated and cohesive way around families. So families were not having to go here, there and everywhere to access support. They went to a friendly, safe and supported place hosted by Home Start, and they found access to the professional assistance of some of our great professionals in the health service and in local authority activity. And it illustrated to me, I suppose, the design of whole family support that is so crucial in bringing services to people rather than requiring people to go to the services around our community. Now, those are two really good examples, and there will be countless other examples that you will have created and innovated and designed in your parts of the country. But I think we all have to honestly accept that two things. Firstly, that there's not enough of that, and secondly, that it's not nearly systemic enough around our country. So there'll be great examples, as I've just given you those two examples, and I could have taken other. I happen to be in Glasgow today, so those examples are fresh in my mind. I could have talked about other examples that I've seen in other parts of the country. But my appeal today is for us to all consider ourselves, those we rub shoulders with in our teams around the country, those that we work with in our communities, to sign up to a national mission to eradicate child poverty, working on that basis. And what does that involve? Well, it involves us breaking down some of the barriers that exist between public services and making sure that services are aligned and cohesive around individuals in the way that I cited in those examples. It involves us not viewing governance or who holds a budget as an obstacle or a barrier to enabling that type of collaboration to take place. It involves us looking for ways in which we can perhaps do things differently to how we have previously done things, but crucially driven by how do we assemble services around families. Because all of the evidence and research and data that I look at convinces me that an essential element of how we progress on this journey must be by the delivery of whole family support, because that is our pathway to eradicate child poverty. Now, the government can do certain things. It can take significant strategic decisions, such as introducing the Scottish Child Payment, which is providing real and tangible support to families in financial difficulty around the country. So, to the triumvirate of interventions that Linda talked about earlier on, the Scottish Child Payment contributes significantly. In March of next year, the Scottish Government will lift the two-child limit, which will enable more families to be supported as a consequence of our intervention. The Government can also fund some of the innovative work that's been taken forward in the Fairer Future partnerships, which today we are extending to a wider range of communities. These partnerships have done outstanding work. They are tremendously refreshing approaches, and today we'll be expanding those partnerships to a range of different areas in the country to ensure that more parts of the country are able to benefit from that type of intervention. So the government can do all of these proactive things. The government's also got to be flexible and responsive in some of the governance that we put out as a consequence of our interventions. You know, having to supply a report to the government, having to account for particular ways in which programmes are taken forward can be cumbersome and obstructive. And I'm committing the government to look as flexibly as we can with public authorities and our agency partners to try to avoid that unnecessary bureaucracy. And of course, the government has got to listen to all of our partners around the country who might say to us, well, look, if the government was able to act differently in this respect, we could make more of an impact as a consequence. And I'm very open, my ministers are very open for that conversation to take place. But fundamentally, what we depend upon is the extent to which all of those involved in this area of policy around the country, in our public authorities, in our third sector organisations, in the private sector, in our communities, in the charitable sector in Scotland, we've got to operate in a fashion that all of us are together working on a national mission to eradicate child poverty by boosting whole family support to families who are in need and getting that support to them as early as possible. So I suppose my invitation to you today is to participate in that endeavour, to participate even more in that endeavour, because I recognise that many of you are already participating in this work. But it's also to do something which I suppose, in some respects, well, I'm going to do it, whether I'm entitled to do it or not, I'm going to do it anyway, is to give you permission to think out with the current arrangements in which we are operating, to essentially enable you to think differently and to operate differently from how you've operated before, and to encourage that culture to develop within Scotland whereby we find the innovative ways of delivering whole family support. So my purpose today is to give you permission to do that, to encourage you to do that, and to enable you to do that. And the Scottish Government will be full partners in all of that endeavour. But we can only succeed in this journey if we align all of our activity behind the agenda of eradicating child poverty, of getting it right for every child, of succeeding in our journey in the promise, and in making sure that the early years of children's lives are the best they possibly can be as a consequence of our intervention. If we do that, then those charts that Linda talked about earlier on will continue to move in the right direction. And what we will be doing as a consequence is something which is so crucial for the future of our country, and that will be about improving the life chances of children in Scotland today. So quite literally, the conversations we have today are about the future of Scotland and our ability to shape it. And I invite you to be part of that journey with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, First Minister. So it's great to have an opportunity now to ask a few questions and hear your views, and we've got a fantastic list of questions that colleagues have put in. So I talked about, and you also talked about, the importance of the early years, and a lot of whole family support, of course, is focused on parents and children, young children. But very importantly, you and I know that supporting young people as part of whole family support is essential as well. And that can be a time in life when things actually are even more difficult for many families. So what are your thoughts on how we make sure that we're not neglecting our teenagers and our young adults?
I think this is an important question, and it's vital that we use every opportunity to mobilise support and intervention to assist young people at every stage in their journey. So when I look at the work that goes on in schools nowadays, schools are performing a much broader role in our society today, whereby they are having to recognise some of the challenges that young people are facing in their lives and putting in place the resources and the arrangements to support young people in that respect. But we've also got to recognise the importance of some of the support services that come through youth work, and local authorities are commissioning lots of such interventions in different parts of Scotland to make sure that young people's needs are met. But fundamentally, the message of my contribution today is relevant to children of any age. It's about assembling around the individual the support they require to have to help them to overcome their difficulties so they can be a full and active participant in our society. And those approaches are the ones that we need to develop as a consequence of our conversations here and in other places to ensure that the needs of every young person are met as a consequence.
Thank you for that. So the second question is an issue that's quite close to my heart and I know is a challenge. So how can we challenge, this colleague said, the risk-averse nature of local authorities or the public sector, particularly around the use of data and connecting data as a tool to address poverty?
I understand the anxiety around this question, but it is absolutely fundamental because our careful use of data to try to identify situations where our support can best be targeted is fundamental to this approach. So implicit in what I'm saying is that there has to be very targeted support in Scotland to meet the needs of those who face greatest challenge. And you can only do that through, well, you can do it through, I suppose you can do it through community connection and through dialogue and engagement, but data is going to help significantly to do that. And I think the crucial point here is about responsible and careful data handling. And public authorities have got statutory duties in this respect, but those statutory duties should never be viewed as barriers and obstacles. They should be requirements that have to be put in place in a system that will actually enable us to identify those who need support. And in a couple of conversations that I had before I came in today, I was hearing, I suppose the common theme coming through a number of those conversations was about the success of early intervention. So all of what I was hearing about, and I hear this all the time when I'm out and about, is I'm hearing from people who see the benefits and the value of early intervention and see the outcomes as a consequence of being able to support children and families at the earliest possible opportunity. And data is going to be a crucial factor in enabling that to be the case. But I think I can't take away the anxiety about data management, but I can encourage a focus on its careful management and handling so that we get the benefit, that we get the greatest benefits of the use of data.
And also, I suppose, the point I made earlier about for our families and communities when they're giving their information, that they don't have to give it multiple times, so that we're connecting up that sharing between organisations.
But I think that gets to the sort of what I would call the pillar to post territory, where families, if like we all know what it looks like. I've been a member of Parliament for 28 years. I've sat with constituents in village and town halls around Perthshire all those years, listening to examples when families have gone from pillar to post, and when they come to me, they're generally at the end of their tenure. And we all know what that looks like. We know how stressful that is. We know how much damage comes from that. And actually, so many of these different elements could be resolved by more effective use of and handling of data to identify where resources might well be best targeted to have the best effect.
Great. And I know we're going to have workshops on many of these themes. I'm going to roll two questions into one that colleagues have asked. And now this is a cross-sector, cross-society endeavour, as we've discussed. So I wanted to ask you about the importance of what do you see the role of the third sector in this, and maybe some examples that you have. And then also the second part of that is community planning partnerships, which I know have different approaches across different parts of the country and are more or less engaged.
On the third sector, I view the third sector as being absolutely pivotal in this journey. So let's go back to my example about Home Start and Maryhill. Home Start is a great organisation. I've seen them at work in my own community in the city of Perth, providing, through essentially the mobilisation of volunteer capacity within the community, good support to families. So Home Start will have, as an example, various other organisations will have similar credentials. I've seen tremendous projects taken forward also by Children First or Aberlour, where the model, I think, is there for us all to see, where a third sector organisation essentially builds that relationship that you talked about earlier on, Linda, where the relationship is built with a family, and then various other supports from public authorities are wrapped around about that support. So I see the third sector as pivotal in all of that activity to ensure that there is the ability to draw together in a trusted, safe environment all of those different interventions from different public authorities. So I think the third sector's got a huge role to play in all of that.
And on to community planning partnerships, just about how we can improve it. Yeah.
I think this is, when I first went into government, I put a lot of time and energy into driving a much greater role for community planning partnerships in the delivery of public services and in improving outcomes in localities. And why did I do that? Well, I did that because in that context, community planning partnerships can be very effective at breaking down barriers, making sure that we don't all operate in compartments. And I think, and that's a very real danger here, that public services operate in a very compartmentalised fashion. My appeal today is basically to overcome all of that. To get, we can't have good outcomes being delivered if public services are not aligned to a common purpose. And at local level, community planning partnerships will enable a lot of that to happen. And they are forums in which tangible benefits for people will come by changing the operating model at local level. Now, if there's barriers in the way of that, let's, for argument's sake, let's speculate wildly that maybe accountability to government is a barrier to all of that. Then I'm willing to have the conversation about how do we tackle that, because without moving out of those compartments, we will not get the full value and benefit of the working together between different public sector organisations.
Thank you for that. Really, really helpful. And again, many colleagues here who are involved in CPPs and working in voluntary organisations as well. Next question I want to ask you, we're just in the process of completing a report, First Minister, on the changes in rural poverty in Scotland in recent decades, which are quite striking between remote and rural, different communities. So we've been talking, the examples you and I perhaps have given have been from urban areas. So what are the particular challenges around whole family support delivery in rural areas? And I know we've got colleagues here from Shetland, Orkney and elsewhere. What should we be thinking about there in this model?
There's a few really relevant points here. The first is that, and the government is doing this, we just had discussions at Cabinet yesterday about this particular point, about the use of data to better enable targeted support to families, which comes beneath some of the traditional data sets that we use, such as the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. That will, SIMD classification is not going to give us as fine-grained a view of the existence of poverty in rural and remote areas as we would like. So we were discussing yesterday how we can, different steps that we can take to establish a much more targeted approach in that respect. So there are data handling issues that we can confront to do that. Second area is that actually, when I spend a lot of time in our island communities, they are very close to my heart, and in our remote and rural communities. And ironically, they are probably best placed to break down some of the barriers. If you take a community such as the Western Isles, a population of about 25,000, those public authorities, if they come together working with the third sector there are many fewer cases to be, and families to be supported, and therefore the support can be as focused as it possibly could be. So we're having various discussions with Western Isles Council, Colony and Share, Orkney Islands Council and Shetland Islands Council on how we can give them ever more flexibility to work with public sector partners to essentially make that support ever more seamless in remote areas. And that's a conversation that I'm very keen to foster with different remote and rural communities, because I think some of the effectiveness of our work in eradicating child poverty or in delivering whole family support is complementary to delivering sustainable public services in areas where it will be a challenge to do so because of the sparseness of the population. So I think there's a number of different points that come together that give us a good opportunity to make that difference.
Great. I know we'll hear some fantastic examples from across the country later. So I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions. Won't be able to cover them all. So just this week, First Minister, I'm going to ask you about alcohol and drugs within whole family support. We've seen the statistics on alcohol mortality, slight reduction that came out yesterday, and we still have huge challenges around drugs in Scotland. So a number of the families that colleagues will be working with across the country have had experience of alcohol and drug misuse. So how does that fit in whole family support, and why is such an important component? Thanks.
I think what strikes me about the necessity of the whole family support approach is that it recognises where people are, not where we would like them to be, where they are. And that's a crucial starting point. So I saw this wonderful short play. It's just a scene really at a school when I was education secretary. Forgive me, Linda, I'm now going to tell a long story in answering your question.
We've got time.
Indulge me for a moment. And this play was performed by the pupils, and it basically started with a pupil coming into a classroom having not completed their homework, and a shouting match emerging between a teacher and a pupil about not completing the homework. And the scene of the classroom conflict then moves to two separate scenes, which is home for the child and home for the teacher. So, home for the child is a scene of chaos. This child who hadn't done the homework was looking after another child, and the parent was drunk, and it was a total shambles. The other end of the stage, teacher goes back to their home and their partner and says, "Oh, John Swinney never handed his homework in again." And partner says, and went on about, it's an hard time, and the partner said, "Did you ask why not?" And teacher said, "Well, no, I didn't." So scene 2 is back in the classroom. "I've not done my homework." And teacher said, "Is everything okay?" And there then turns out a completely different conversation. Now, I use that as a bit of an illustration that the potential of a child to be fulfilled will be inhibited. Well, it's likely to be inhibited. It won't always be, but it's likely to be inhibited if there is a drug or alcohol addiction in the house. So, whole family support has got to focus on finding people where they are and making sure that the support is there. The thinking behind the promise is to keep families together as much as we possibly can do. All the data tells us that families are better if they are able to be kept together. Now, in some cases, it's not possible, it's not safe, there are exceptions, but generally, that is the prevailing culture. And it's important that services are aligned to make sure that support is offered where that family is. So, to answer your question, it's a long answer to your direct question, Linda. The drug and alcohol services that we make available have got to be part of this approach that we take to meet people where they are and help them to build their resilience and build their strength.
So a final question from me and from the audience. We've talked about the voluntary sector, community planning partnerships. We've all mentioned the NHS and local government. But local businesses have got a part to play in this as well, haven't they, First Minister? So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that and anything you just want our colleagues to keep in mind when they're talking about cross-sector approaches for whole family support.
Well, I think obviously part of this journey is, when I talked in the early part of my contribution about the interrelationship of the 4 policy themes of the government. So one of them is about boosting the economy, and part of my cancellation of our visit was I was trying to boost the economy. That's my defence, Linda.
It's okay.
So employment, good, high-quality, sustainable employment is going to be a crucial component of how we support families to overcome poverty. Now, we have very low levels of unemployment in Scotland today, about 3.5%, but we've still got significant levels of economic inactivity. And at the same time, we've got shortages of people available for employment in a whole variety of sectors. So there will be people who are today economically inactive who need to be supported to enable them to become economically active. Some of that will come down to whole family support, because if a parent, for example, has an addiction, their ability to contribute constructively to the labour market is going to be quite constrained. So they have to be supported. If there are other issues in the family, they have to be supported to enable those individuals to be able to participate in sustained employment. If we can do that, then when I come back to those 4 themes, we've got multiple beneficial impacts as a consequence, and business has got a big role to play here. Now, there are, of course, a range of businesses who do some superb work and who are very engaged, and I'm very grateful to them for how they go about this in essentially recognising, again, meeting people where they are, that there were people who join the labour market who may well need a bit more support to enable them to be fully participating in the labour market. Now, one of the great privileges of my role as a minister over many years, particularly as First Minister, is I get to meet people whose lives have been transformed by good interventions. So somebody who's been economically inactive, somebody who may have been in prison, somebody who's had an addiction. And in my work, I encounter people who've got over all of that, who are participants, contributors to society, whose lives are better as a consequence. And that's the journey that we need to make more widespread for people. Because if we do that, then we will have lower levels of child poverty, we will have a stronger economy, we will have the resources to enable us to make the journey to net zero, and we'll have stronger public services, because actually some of those individuals I'm talking about will have less requirement on public services. They may in fact become public servants and deliver those public services. So it's about seeing all of that, how it connects together and how it can make a difference for people. And fundamentally, it's about the journey of transforming people's lives. And that's what we're all in the business of trying to do, transforming people's lives to ensure that they are able to fulfil their potential. And that starts with our children.
Well, thank you, First Minister, for sharing us your thoughts, your insights, and responding to some of those questions. I think that's given us a lot of food for thought. We're going to have one more session now, just before a short break, but please join me in thanking the First Minister.